you should never say what if. You never want to be in a position to say, what if I'd done that? What if I'd given that a go?
Hello, my name's Nathan Brake. I'm the creative director of VidMedia, a creative contents agency. It's my privilege to welcome you to Legacy Conversations. This channel exists to share the journeys of incredibly successful individuals, to pass on the lessons that they've learned, the mindsets that they've adopted, and the disciplines that they've developed in order to get to where they are today. My hope is that in sharing these journeys, we can learn from them and apply these same principles to our own growth in order to quicken it, so that we too can create lasting legacies. This week I'm speaking with Lise Hudson. She's the rector of the High School of Dundee. Lise has spent her whole career at the High School of Dundee, and it was really encouraging to hear the passion that Lise has for young people and this vision that she has for community that goes way beyond the school. Enjoy. So Lise, thank you so much for joining me today.
No.
It's a real pleasure to be with you in the headmistress's office.
I know, this is always a kind of, people come in or wait outside, and there's always the story that people have that they associate with the head's office is really fascinating, actually.
Yes.
Everyone has an understanding of their perception of what's going to happen inside.
Yes, that's funny. Okay.
So yes, a pleasure to be here, Nathan. Pleasure.
Good. So let's go back, and if you could share with us, what was your experience like at school?
So I think there's sort of two parts to it, because I was initially at school in a little kind of prep school in Helensburgh, which no longer exists anymore till I was 8, and then my parents moved house, and my mum and dad had another baby after eight and a half years, and so I moved into a school in Glasgow. And at the time, I sat the entrance exam for the school. It was a girls' school in Glasgow, part school for girls. And when I sat the entrance exam, they were quite concerned about my proficiency in, writing, spelling, literacy and numeracy. And so they decided to say that the best thing would be for me to go back a year. So I joined primary 4, but I was primary 5 age.
Wow.
So that's the sort of first thing, which again, it's really interesting reflecting on it, because I was aware of that, very much aware of it, and it came down to the fact that I'd been in the little school I'd been in, the prep school I'd been taught this way of teaching spelling and reading and writing. It was called the Initial Teaching Alphabet, I think, ITA. I think it was Teaching Alphabet. And its premise was that you taught reading and writing by sounds. And that's okay but there were special symbols, as I remember, which meant that I didn't learn to read and write and spell in the same way, and certainly not the way that my own children learned to read and write and spell. So actually, spelling has always been something which has been a challenge for me.
Wow.
However, it's interesting because I ended up applying to do English at university, which is the story. So I think if I reflect on that, I've always slightly carried that with me. I'm a year older. I was held back, and I think it feeds into a sense of just a kind of feeling that you're not intellectual. So, and sitting from this, space now, I think I often reflect actually, how much is that still there in how I sort of come at things, and potentially how I've developed as a teacher over time. The other thing which is people find quite surprising is that I was absolutely painfully shy. I really was. I was an only child, obviously, till I was 8.5. And Mum was very young when she had me. Relatively, I think she was very young. She was 22. And, I was very much, attached to her. I didn't like to go and, sort of stay overnight anywhere else. I wasn't particularly keen on going and playing with other people. It was mum and me. Dad, obviously, but Dad went into Glasgow to work. So I spent a lot of time with mum and my mum's mum and sister. And I was sort of very much, within that kind of matriarchal adult group. But I was very shy. And my mum still says, she will come to things and, I'm standing up, speeches and votes of thanks. And she often says, I sometimes can't quite believe that you're doing this job. Her and me both. But wow. It is an interesting perspective on, people find that surprising because they think of me as being confident. But certainly at the start, I wasn't, the opposite of that. So it's interesting to reflect what changed. Yeah. And so, the school that I went to was, with that sort of slightly kind of, I suppose, the start of it for me was, traumatic's probably too strong a word, but it was difficult, it was challenging. And I remember, being the oldest girl in the class, and that was always the case. And I think I sort of came into a role which was very much the agony aunt. People would come to me because I was older maybe, or maybe just because of my personality. I wasn't somebody who was a great party goer, or, sort of the whole boy thing passed me by until relatively late. So the other girls would come and sort of ask me if they had problems or whatever, and I would sort of give them advice. It's interesting when I think about going into a pastoral role, and that was really where it potentially came from. Mm. And so I think that I was pretty kind of mediocre until I went into fifth year at school. And I had, so fourth year, fifth year, I don't know when I think back, it's difficult to think back, but what's the sort of change, these moments that changed the direction of travel. And I often have said this to my pupils actually. I met a boy who was at the local school. One of my friends introduced us and we started going out with one another. He was very clever, proper sort of, he was a year ahead. I was completely sort of bowled over by him. He was incredibly artistic. He used to write me letters that were illustrated. Still got them. And but the one thing about him was that, you did well. You worked hard and you did well. It didn't happen by magic. And he had a system for how do you prepare for exams. And he shared it with me. He did a revision planner with me, and I wasn't not going to do it. So I had this sort of, my prelim exams in fifth year were fine, but the headmistress spoke to my parents and said, she's a very nice girl, Lise, but she's not really going to amount to anything academically. And we lived by this time sort of in Lanarkshire. It was a good 45 minutes away from Glasgow, and Dad had ran a family business in Glasgow, so he used to drive me in the morning and drive me home at night. I had no life, no social life really at all. It's one of the reasons why, I didn't really go to parties. I was just quite a lonely is probably not right, but lonely. And I had these younger siblings. So I often, would play with them, and we'd play schools. Of course, we played schools. That was what we did. And they had to sit around the table, and I was a teacher. And so that was kind of fairly early on. And then when I was doing the first set of exams, your fourth year exams, O grades back in the day, my granny and my mum's sister, my auntie who wasn't married, they lived about 25 minutes away. But they lived at the end of a train line, a direct train link into Glasgow. They lived in Lanark. So I went and stayed with them just at the time of my exams, and I used to travel into school on the train, and there was this huge community of pupils who were going into the independent schools in Glasgow, and it was a complete change of my life. So actually that's really what made the difference, and they looked after me. They didn't do anything else. I was their project. I think that made the difference. And then into my fifth year at school, I stayed there. And so I actually lived with them for the last, sort of 2 and a bit years of my time at school. I went home occasionally, but I really moved out, almost like being in a boarding environment.
Wow. And
that was transformational, because I then was in a community of young people my own age who were doing the same things. And that's when I met John, he was at one of these schools. He didn't travel in and out, he lived in Glasgow, but that made a big difference. And so when I sat my hires, I did really well. And the school were, not quite sure what happened. And there was a question mark, would I apply for Oxford and Cambridge? But that wasn't really for me. So I ended up applying to St Andrews, Glasgow and Edinburgh, and chose St Andrews Uni. And came to St Andrews to do English. Now, prior to that, I had wanted to do singing kind of at the Academy of Music and Drama, be a singer. It's something that I'd always loved to do, right from early age. And it's something I had been successful in, I suppose, at school. Solo parts, and I was head of the choir. And that built my confidence because I was performing. And I think, again, that's pretty much in my philosophy of what's important in education is I know myself how important that was, not just from a musical point of view. In fact, maybe not even primarily from a music point of view, but actually the whole thing about performance and practice and, application to perfecting something and getting better at something, and then having to put yourself out there completely exposed. And singing is something where you don't have an instrument that you bring along and play. It's your being. And I think that built my confidence in a very specific way. Wow. But it also made me realise how important that is for young people.
Yes.
So yeah, but I didn't get in to do music. My piano playing wasn't good enough, but you needed a second instrument. And actually I ended up going to St Andrews to do English. And that's, looking back with the benefit of hindsight, that was definitely the right thing. Because what I was able to do at St Andrews was to do all the music that I could want alongside some studying. And so I was a member of the chapel choir and the madrigal group and all of these singing groups, which were just wonderful. The musical life, the choral life of the university.
It's quite the journey there. It's interesting to hear that you would, when playing with your brothers and sisters, that you would be teacher. Was that something that you felt was in you, and did you ever think, I would like to be a teacher?
I think I've reflected on this a lot, because particularly young people ask you, did you always want to be a teacher, Mrs. Hudson? And I say, I don't remember making the decision. I was the eldest sister, so I was naturally bossy. That's what my siblings would say. And yes, I think I did. I always knew that was something that it was never a conscious decision. Not even when it came to applying to teacher training, it just seemed the natural thing for me to do.
And so after St Andrews, is that when you applied to do teacher training? And
so from there, as I go back to Gordon Carruthers, I met him and he said, well, you should apply to Cambridge. I was like, I'm not going to get into Cambridge. That little voice in my head that says, I had a 2-2 from St Andrews, almost a 2-1, but I ended up with a Desmond. Again, I carry that around, I think, as well, Nathan. I do. I think, particularly being married to an academic, I've always ended up with really, really intellectual kind of guys. It's a weird thing. And, I sort of said to Gordon Carruthers, I'll never get into Cambridge. He went, don't be ridiculous. You should apply. This is a vocation. It's not about necessarily, what you're anything else. This is a vocation. And so I did. I took his advice. I applied to Cambridge and I got in. So I went and did my teacher training down in Cambridge and was able to sing in Emmanuel College Choir and keep the music going. And it was an amazing experience. Really good. A wonderful course with a really forward-looking guy at the time who believed in the importance of empathy and teaching history through role play, which was really, that was quite influential for me because of performance and the music and the whole, I'd been involved in production, so there's a drama element to that as well. Teaching history, the key for me is that it's got to be engaging. And the way to make it engaging is to dive into what was it like. You need to empathise, or try to empathise as far as you can with human beings from the past. And, you know, there's a sort of philosophy that, you know, do we keep repeating the same mistakes of the past? Well, yes, we do. So, you know, history is a story about what people did in the past. And I think there's a connection there into what my philosophy of history teaching was all about. And it partly comes from that year in Cambridge with that focus very much of, quite experimental and controversial at the time. So yeah, it was an amazing year, really good.
And what was your kind of dreams, aspirations finishing Cambridge?
It's a really good question. The thing which springs into my mind was that I was going out with my now husband across that year or so when I was at Cambridge, and so I wanted to be with him. That was really the biggest, you know, sort of aspiration that I had. Mm-hmm. I wanted to teach. I wanted to get a job. I wanted to go in and be a history teacher. No doubt, coming out of about teacher training, I think sometimes quite a few people that I trained with were like, actually, this is not for me. Mm. But I never felt that. You know, the bug that you get about when you can see a light bulb coming on for a young person. It doesn't matter what it's about, but that is a bit of a drug. Or I found it that way. That's actually what it's for. And if you get that just once, if you can make a difference in a young person's life just once, it becomes this thing that I found motivated me. But so I think, you know, the aspiration, yes, I wanted to get a history teaching job, but I wanted to be with John. And, you know, England had a huge amount of opportunities, lots of different types of schools, the community colleges around Cambridge, they had sixth form colleges, and we don't have that in Scotland. So there was lots of options, and John, I phoned him and said, look, what should I do? I'm not sure what I should be applying for. And he said, I think you should apply for the Scottish jobs. And it was a sort of, this is about our relationship, you know, it was make or break, a year apart. He'd got a permanent job at St Andrews, having been temporary, and he said, yeah, I think you should apply for the Scottish job. So I did. And I came up to Scotland so Lomond were much more efficient. They were very efficient. They invited me up. It was a wonderful experience. I remember phoning here because what I wanted to try and do was, I was coming away from finishing my teacher training, so coming up to Scotland for the interviews, I phoned the high school and said, you know, I've applied for the history job. I'm just wondering whether there'd be any opportunity to coordinate the interview, because I'm coming up to Scotland, I've been invited to interview at another school. And yeah, they were very rude here, very rude. But they did say, well, yeah, that's fine, just come the next day. So I went to Lomond, was interviewed, was offered the job, and the head there said to me, he said, I see you are applying for a job at Dundee High. He said, it's a permanent job, it's a full-time job. He said, I think we would love you to work here. But he said, I think you should go and see what happens at Dundee High and then let me know. So I was in the wonderful position of coming from Lomond, where it's been a great experience. I loved the school, it was very familiar, the place. And I came to the interview here, and I was interviewed in this room 35 years ago.
That's hilarious.
It's strange, because I think, how is that possible? How is that time passed? I don't know, it feels like a flash in some ways. And it was a terrible experience.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely dreadful. I was interviewed in here by the head and the head of history and the deputy rector, all of whom individually were, as it turned out, you know, amazing people in their own right, their own role. But that experience for me, coming into the school, I didn't see any of the school. I was sort of kept in a little cubbyhole around the corner. which is now the photocopying room, known as the waiting room back then. And the deputy rector, he really tried hard. He was a wonderful man, one of my great heroes, G.C. Stewart. And he tried to kind of put me at my ease, but it was almost impossible. And I remember this space being dark with a burgundy carpet. And I was sitting almost where I am now, but facing this way with a big table behind, and I was questioned. And coming from Cambridge, which was quite, at the time, that it was quite a progressive course. And they'd said, take the newspaper in that you kind of, you would associate with. I brought the Independent with me, which was quite new at the time. And I was wearing culottes as well. I was really radical for this place. I was, asked about empathy, and thought it was, I obviously, this was absolutely central to the successful teaching of. And I think the head was horrified by it. Anyway, I left the interview and I thought, no, I'm definitely going to phone Lomond and just accept the job. I didn't feel it had gone well. I didn't think there was any didn't feel any frisson that was on the same page or anything. And I hadn't really met anyone in the school apart from, briefly the deputy rector, and I'd obviously seen the head of history, but not had any chance to see whether, what wavelength he was on. So Bob Nimmo did phone, and he offered me the job, and I asked him why. I was so surprised, Nathan. I asked him why.
Why?
Mr. Nimmo said, I'm phoning for my parents' evening. He said, I'm not really willing to discuss it just now. And I said, well, I would like to come in and see the school before I make a decision. And there was silence at the other end of the phone. And he said, oh, well, it's quite irregular, but he said, if you could just phone my secretary in the morning and we'll see if we can arrange that. So unbeknown to me, and I found out later that he had been absolutely kind of horrified, well, not horrified, but just incredulous that no one had ever, not just taken the job and said yes like that. No one had ever said, I'd actually quite like to meet the department, meet the people I'll be working with, sort of see you around the school a bit before I make a decision. And
wow.
And when I did come in the next day, it was a no-brainer. I met the people that I was going to work with, and met Ian Wilson, who became my mentor as head of history, and I, met the other members of the department and got to meet some of the pupils, and it was a no-brainer. So very quickly I said yes, and realised that actually that experience of interview was not an experience of the school. Again, I think that was really important for when I got into a senior position, when I was promoted and into a senior position, and now as rector, interviewing people is, I come at that from a very specific perspective, because my view is that they are interviewing us. And if you go into an organisation, you should be thinking, is this the place for me? And we need to be as open as possible as to what the actual experience of working here is.
That's really cool.
Rather than, either way, you don't want to hide the school. The high school was hidden from me, and I came away with a completely inaccurate and negative experience, when in fact, had I been exposed to the school, it would have been entirely the opposite. So it's interesting. That was an interesting learning for me.
And so good to hear that you've taken that experience and actually changed the way that you then do interviews for others, so that they have a much more pleasant experience, and like you say, that reverse of seeing them as interviewing you. I really like that. I
think it's important. I think because you often you'll have really strong candidates, and there's only one job. So you'll have people who are really good, but ultimately they're not the ones that you offer the job to. And my aim is that whatever the outcome, the experience needs to be positive. And that comes from, I think, being clear about what the interview is going to be. We do put people through their paces, I think. It's a rigorous process, but we ask them to teach. If they're teachers, we ask them to do a sample lesson. For senior posts, we would be involving pupils and staff just in kind of a meeting situation, and then some written tasks, an interview, but panel interview, which is probably more what people would expect. But for me, the feedback's really important. That I will give feedback as a matter of course to any shortlisted candidate, but then to anyone who asks for it. I think that's really important, because for me, if there's any advice or context I can give to help support someone else's professional development, that's really good. And I think it's applications to jobs take a lot of energy and effort, and particularly coming and doing a day with us and being interviewed, it's a lot for somebody. So I think the least we can do is to give the time back, to give a perspective.
Yeah.
And often people will then stay connected with the school, and they'll end up, we appoint them in the future to different roles, and that's really important to me.
Oh, brilliant. So, what was your first ever lesson teaching here like?
The one I remember, Nathan, I don't remember for particularly positive reasons.
Oh no.
I can talk about this because I've publicly spoken about it before. But so I was 23 when I joined the school. And one of the things that Bob Nimmo asked my referee, this is the rector, asked my referee, is she tough enough? He was concerned that I wasn't maybe tough enough to be teaching in the high school. And my referee, who was one of my university lecturers, he said, oh yes, she's tough enough. She's tough enough. He said, there'll be no problem there. But anyway, the first lesson was a higher class. And it was made up of fifth year who were doing higher, and it was also sixth year who were doing crash higher history. And I remember, it's now converted, but I taught in effectively what was a hall. And I remember my head of department, Ian, who was a huge influence in how I teach history and just my whole career. He was really influential, Ian. Very cool guy, young head of department. He was promoted very young. He was 29 when he got the job. I think about 3 or 4 years before I came to the school. And he wore tapestry waistcoats, Ian, and was just the height of sheep. Coached the second 15. He was very cool, and the kids absolutely adored him, but they also respected him. He had that brilliant balance and had amazing presence in the classroom, and just made history absolutely enthralling. Anyway, he was very clear with me that first impressions, you don't get a second chance to make a first impression, Lise. This is it. And this is the class that are going to be, more important than pretty much anything else. These are 5th and 6th year. These are the ones where your reputation will be made, so no pressure. You have to go into the class. He rehearsed it with me. The way that you walk into the class from the first moment they meet you, the first impression will be made. Again, it's something I've never forgotten. It's something that I think about a lot when I'm going into a new situation, not just in a teaching scenario, but so he said you need to walk in as if you own it. You have to believe it, and the lesson runs on your say so. He said there's lots of time to get to know the kids. There's lots of time to find the individual things that make them tick. But it was very much that this first lesson is about you establishing yourself as their teacher. Mm-hmm. And he said, if you don't do that, very quickly they will make up their own version of how it's going to be, and they will think and believe that they can influence that. Now they can down the road, he said, but not to begin with.
Right.
So I was okay, so fine, and I walked in and that was fine. I started off, you did the register, it was all quite traditional back then. And there was one member of the class, a 6th year doing crash hire history, who was, he was very sure of himself, and yeah, he was a kind of likely lad who was just, he was obviously somebody people looked to sort of take a lead,
right.
And he was just not going to do what I asked him to do. So you know, the first time I asked him to do something and he wasn't particularly disruptive. You're not getting up, running around the room or causing it. He just was impertinent, and you know, taking the opportunity to sort of make comments and ask questions, and you know, how old are you? And this is unacceptable. You know, you're not. I said that we're doing history, and this is introduction, and blah, blah, blah. So, long story short, I don't even remember what caused it, but I put him out of the classroom. I said, you need to go out of the classroom, go out and stand outside. And I said, and you know, I will deal with you later. He is the only pupil I have ever put outside the class. Wow. Ever, since then. So far, I mean, it's not over yet. And I spent the whole lesson, Nathan, thinking, oh my goodness. One of the deputy heads, back then the offices of the deputy heads, it's really interesting, were not in one block like they are now, in a central kind of, you know, hermetically sealed area of the school, but they were dotted around. And one of the deputy heads, who was ferocious, his office was up there. And I spent the whole lesson just worrying that he was going to come out, Mr. Holmes was going to come out and spot Simon, and or Nom, as he was affectionately known. And it would be my fault. You know, I knew that it wouldn't be, what have you done? You've been that, well, he probably would have said that, but ultimately, you know, we've got this new young female teacher who can't control her classes. And I didn't know whether he would leg it out of the building or be somewhere else. I had no idea. Anyway, so it was torture to carry on with the lesson and not be able to tell whether he was still there or what had happened. Anyway, I finished the lesson, everybody left, and when I came out of the classroom or the hall, he was standing there. Miss McCaslin, I'm sorry. And I was just like, you need to come with me. I'm not talking to you, you need to come with me. And I made him stand outside Ian's office, the head of department's office, and he dealt with him. So I didn't ever discipline him. Wow. So, you know, Ian told him in no uncertain terms. And that was what I suppose made the change, because he was one of these pupils who had huge influence over his peers. And basically, he felt ashamed of what he'd done, and he was made to feel ashamed. He was made to apologise to me with the head of department there. We agreed the way forward, you know, the parameters for how things would go. And he became a bit of a sort of champion in a way. But Ian was very skilled at making sure that that was what happened, not the reverse. But the end of the story, the kind of interesting phase is that last year, Simon was invited by the Old Boys Club to speak at their dinner as their keynote speaker, and I agreed to go. I obviously speak on behalf of the school, and I was able to, both of us independently recalled this experience. He remembers it, and I obviously remember it, and there we were at this dinner speaking together, and I was able to tell him that actually, you know, he's now got 4 children, and I said that was karma. But it's that, and that is the thing about being still connected with the school and being in this job, because I had so many of my former pupils remain connected either as FPs or now as parents of pupils at the school. Wow. Which is just the most incredible privilege, because the stories, you know, the 30 years, he's now, you know, he was only probably, he'd have been 4 or 5 years younger than me, which is nothing. At the time, it's a huge gulf, but it's not really, you know, very long. So that connection to the community, you know, and his mum and dad are still involved in the school, and it's an amazing privilege. Wow. But that's the first lesson. It didn't go well. But it all seemed to work out in the end. Yes.
That's really, really funny. Wow. A good one to remember.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so as a teacher of history, are there any kind of valuable lessons that you've taken from history and kind of taken on yourself to be like, I'm going to remember that, or things that you've learned from or held on to?
It's a really good question, because I'm still teaching history. I have a second year class, so twice a week, 2 40-minute periods a week, I get to go and do the real job. That's just, it's wonderful. It's great that the head of department trusts me to do that. I can't do too much damage. But one of the things for me is, so there's twofold, I think. The first thing is I want to do all I can to get them enthused with the subject. The study of history should be fun. It should be absolutely exciting, engaging. I've always started, when I teach, talking about the fact that history is sometimes seen as this thing you blow the dust off. It's in the past, it's kind of dead and buried, it's something which is old and kind of, not relevant. And that's just to sort of say, well, history was 5 minutes ago. History was 2 minutes ago, it was the last second, it was the start of this conversation. It's alive, it's happening, it's not dead and buried, it's a dynamic thing. So that's the first thing, which I think is really important. And I apply that to, yes, just life, I suppose. Life and learning. It's never finished. It's a constant journey. You never arrive. It's just it's a phase, or it's a next stage. And the second thing is just that history and learning should be relevant. So whatever topic is being studied, and you really get to do this, I suppose, with the younger years before they get, unfortunately, and I think this needs to change maybe for another part of the conversation in terms of a focus on end exams and results. But at second year, it's before they've made their subject choices, talking to them, I say to my second year, we're doing Mandela at the moment, Nelson Mandela, and looking at, does he deserve to be seen as a freedom fighter or a terrorist? Why is that relevant? Why would the issues that Mandela fought for be relevant now? It's so rich, I could spend the whole time just on that one question and getting them to consider, what do they know about the world now? How can you explain what's happening in Israel, with Israel and Palestine, without knowing some of the history? And to what extent do our young people engage in current affairs? They don't. Many of them don't. And increasingly get information that's curated and with a particular bias or a particular political perspective, or all sorts of other things that affect the basis on which our young people are forming their opinions. And history should be, it's not about learning what dates are in the past. We've got actually easy access to know what happened when. You don't need to remember that. But actually what you need is the ability to interrogate information and test out what you're looking at, listening to, reading, because your opinion's based on it, and that's really precious. And so for me, history is absolutely crucial. And the skills that you learn in history in terms of assessing evidence and being able to put together, written or spoken, an argument using evidence to advance a debate, not being one-sided. It needs to be balanced, and it needs to be evidence and fact, sort of fact-based, to the point where you actually are able to express an opinion while understanding the exact opposite position. So I don't think I necessarily ever talk about that. So actually just articulating that, it's interesting. It's probably something I should be speaking about more, saying more widely, and using the platform I've got in this role to do it, because I genuinely am worried about our young people being exposed to extremes. Everything's polarized, jumping on a bandwagon, one side or the other. If you don't agree with me, then, I can't engage with you. And we need to foster the people who are going to actually be able to make a difference and who are going to be successful in the future are people who are able to understand the opposite view, empathise with the opposite view, and take time to understand it. Because the other way, is Armageddon.
That is so true. Yeah.
So yeah, I think that it's a combination of I want them to be engaged in it.
Yeah.
It should be fun, it should be engaging, it should be exciting. But the reason for that is because it's really important.
Yes. That's amazing. What an answer. Wow. I love that. Yeah. And yeah, so true. There definitely needs to be that understanding of all aspects and be able to engage even though you may not agree.
Yeah.
On things, definitely.
Yeah, and I think it's that history is now here, and so history and modern studies are one department here,
Mm-hmm.
but it also has a really close segue into the study of English, debating, writing, discursive writing, being able to present your views, and then the other thing which I've chosen to embrace this year in the class. And again, as rector, this is something that we need to be aware of is ChatGPT, AI, large language models. And one of the things that we do in history is ask them at the end of a unit, they write an answer, an essay answer to whatever the issue is. So, for example, the Mandela, does he deserve to be known as a terrorist or a freedom fighter? So, ChatGPT is being used by our pupils. Of course, they use it. Just do your homework, you type in the question, and in 10 seconds it will produce an answer for you. So one of the things I wanted to do was to say to them, look, I know that you're going to use this. It's not cheating. We can't go forward with trying to control it. It's ridiculous. It's a tool. So I've said to them in the past, we've stepped through it. I said, right, you can use ChatGPT, but I want you to tell me, and I want you to improve it. Now, most of them don't do either. Now, I think I can tell, but of course, probably I can't. Anyway, this time for this essay, they're working on it, it's due on Friday, I've given them a ChatGPT sample. So I asked ChatGPT to write an answer to this question based on some of the evidence that the pupils have gathered to use. And that's the basis on which, so they've got the sample, and the task is to improve it.
Well, that's very interesting.
So, we'll see.
Yeah. Very cool.
So it's a bit of an experiment, but you can experiment because where are we with this? There's a lot of anxiety around AI taking over, and it will take over for the human beings who don't use it properly. So yes, there are going to be large swathes of the population for whom AI will just do all the jobs that they would do, but we always need. It's not human. So for me, I've got an opportunity as rector, and we all do as teachers, to have an impact in ensuring that the human beings that we have some kind of a responsibility for nurturing understand this as a tool, and if they don't learn how to use it, then someone else will. So in terms of enterprise, and so much is written about, AI is going to take over the jobs and it's going to do this, that, and the other. My position is that no, that's not the case. There's going to have to be somebody who's ahead of it and who's developing it. It's not happened out of it's human beings who are making this stuff work and developing it and spending a heck of a lot of money in developing it. So better work out what the tool is, how to use it, and how to ensure that your opinion is based on as closely being able to assess the evidence on which it's based, check it out, test it out, without being completely cynical and not trusting anyone, having really good skills at interrogating information and evidence, which is at the heart of history and what we try to do.
Amazing. Wow.
Yeah, so
Good.
see.
Good. So when you came in at 23, did you have your sight set on this office? Or did you have any kind of career development of this is where I want to get to or anything like that?
I certainly didn't ever think it wouldn't even have crossed my mind that this was a job I could have done.
Oh, wow.
I think as well, when I think back, why is that? Well, I actually didn't ever think that the high school would appoint a female rector. Not even when I applied for the job. So that's one thing. And I've come to think about that quite a lot, because I don't think I've experienced discrimination as a woman. I've not been conscious of that, Nathan, but equally well, it's important that I recognise that it happens and understand, well, okay, well, as a female rector, what am I doing to be a strong role model for everyone, but for the young women in our community and sort of more widely. But I think I would have thought there was no, that wouldn't happen. Anyway, you know, rectors of the high school are doctors and OBEs and CBEs, and that was not my thing at all. I've got a Desmond from St Andrews, a 2-2, and you know, I'm not an intellectual in my head. But the thing which I knew I always wanted to do was the pastoral piece. I love teaching history, but the bit about teaching which I particularly liked was the background, the context with which young people came to whatever it was they were doing. You know, and I think that probably comes, I don't know what, overthinking, I've never really analysed it, but it probably comes from the fact that as the big sister, I was looking after my younger siblings, and I liked that. I liked working with children and young people. And my teacher training, I really like teenagers. I find teenagers fascinating, and the whole psychological and physiological development was something which I really found interesting at Cambridge, studying, you know, how children learn, and you know, so the philosophy and the evidence for that. And you know, at the time, what was current, as I was saying, was role play and empathy, the use of empathy in teaching history. But I really found that period of development fascinating, because it's such turmoil. And yet it's just what an amazing opportunity to support and be able to help young people navigate through that period of their lives. So I think there was always a pastoral kind of driver for me. And, you know, I spent a lot of time working with young people individually. I spent a lot of time helping them with their revision, because I had this worked for me, so this is what I would suggest. And Ian Wilson, as head of department, was very much someone who was really ahead of his time in terms of looking at working memory and the importance of understanding how that worked and explaining to the pupils how this works. It's scientific. His view was, this is scientific. He used to say, you know, that actually give him any day of the week, he would take a worthy plodder over a talented waster. So that actually the amazing things could happen just with organising time, making sure that you kind of were revisiting and revisiting and revisiting. It was, you know, we now have conferences entirely on retrieval practice, and it's, you know, seen as cutting edge, and Ian was right up there way back. So I think that was I knew, and kids could come to me, talk to me about their problems, and it goes back to being the agony aunt at school. And so professionally, I think that piece was important for me. So it was a pastoral route that I wanted to go down. I really wanted to go down that route. And when the opportunity came we had the first ever guidance team was established in the school in 1999. So I'd been here almost 10 years. I'd had my first child, I'd had Ella in 1997. And this team was put together. And I was offered one of the principal teacher's jobs. So I had the real privilege of being part of a new team that had responsibility for pastoral care in the school. It's great. And then I don't know whether, the job then I really wanted was the senior leadership job for pastoral, deputy head pastoral. And if I'm absolutely honest, I think that was probably my favourite job so far. I may change my mind when I get further through this one, but that was the real. So it was a great combination of being responsible for coordinating pastoral care in the senior school, but there was still a lot of contact with the pupils, and I was child protection coordinator, so it was a really important job. I believe that's the most important thing that we do as teachers, is to keep the children safe. And I was part of I came into the senior leadership team with a new head, joined at the same time, and quite largely a new team, and it was a very exciting time. So looking back, I think that was probably my favourite job.
Wow.
Apart from the history teaching itself.
Yes, yeah. And did you see a difference in pupils and their kind of journey through school, through kind of that pastoral element and relationship with them?
Yeah, I think my philosophy here is that if the pastoral, so if things are not going right in your life, whatever they are, whatever it is, if there's problems at home, if you're feeling that you're not worthy, if things happen to you that you don't understand, physically, mentally, stuff happens in your life that you feel you can't control, it doesn't matter how much you sit in a class and try and do your work, it won't be successful. Because my philosophy is that actually, if the pastor, and I believe that all discipline, all behaviour, rather than discipline, all behaviour can be explained, not explained away. I think there's an important distinction there. But behaviour is a result of something. If you have a child who's underachieving, or who's not doing their homework, or who's rude to you, or whatever it is, the behaviour comes from somewhere. It's not because they're evil at core and want to make your life difficult. And I think that's what I believe, and it's how I approach things. So, do I feel that I've made a difference? I hope so. I certainly have had young people tell me that I made a difference to them. And, it's amazing to have a young person tell them that, and this happens, I know this happens to my colleagues, less so in this role, but I do have young people say, "You saved my life. Your advice changed my life. Your advice, support, your interest in me, this is why I'm where I am now." Now, I mean, it's just, as I said it earlier, what better job could there be? I don't know. I don't know of it. Now, I haven't done another job, but I cannot imagine doing anything else. And I think it's just such a privilege. What a privilege to be in a position where you can have that kind of positive impact. But I also know that you can have equally well, and probably a greater, negative impact as a teacher. And the wrong word at the wrong time, unthinking, perhaps because there's something going on for you as a teacher at that particular time, can have a devastating impact on a young person. So the job, the role, teacher, or engaging with young people has huge potential to change their lives the better, and also massive potential to be limiting, debilitating and damaging at worst.
That's a very big responsibility.
I suppose when I think about that responsibility, it's about making sure that you don't ask young people to do anything that you wouldn't do yourself. The whole question of discipline is a big thing. Teachers should be respected. Yes, they should, but they need to show respect first. All the values that we live by need to be demonstrated by us as adults first. From the rector all the way down if that's the right term, but through the organisation, so that our young people understand what's expected because they see it. Not just because they're told, but because they actually see it. and understand why it's important. So yes, that's responsibility, but I always think of it from a privileged point of view.
That's good. Amazing. So you were appointed as rector in January 2020.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure you must have had a big vision of what life could be like for you, and then boom, COVID. What was that like for you?
I look back on it was surreal. I think it's the first word that I would sort of think of. I did have big plans, but interestingly, prior to coming into the job, we lost an employment tribunal, and so a member of our staff had sort of sued for constructive dismissal, and the judgment went against the school in a very public way, and it was extremely difficult for the community, but particularly for the former head. And I was also, as deputy rector, I was part of that. So I was really conscious coming into the job that I needed to, if it's not too sort of, I'm not quite sure this right word, but I felt that there's some healing needed to be done. Trust had been disrupted, broken between the staff and the senior staff in the school, and the community felt it had been rocked by it. It was extremely difficult, and coming into the role, I'd been sort of in parent meetings with people saying that I should resign before I'd taken on the job, and I said, if I had to respect the judgment of the judge, that's that. But if I believed that what was said was true, I would have stepped down. I didn't, and I'd be judged on what I did in the role. So actually, there was quite a kind of pressure coming into the role that was something that I wanted to do. And so I started with speaking to the staff individually, asking them to come and see me. They didn't have to, but I asked them to come and see me and met them individually, and just tried to take a view of what would I do if I was going into a new environment. You start by getting to know the people that are critical to our young people in the school, and that's our teachers and our wider staff. They're the ones who actually create the learning experience. So speaking to them, and so that was a great start. I loved sort of meeting colleagues on a different basis and listening to their perspective of the good, the bad, and the ugly was what I asked them. But the actual, COVID, it genuinely feels, looking back, that it wasn't there one day and it was the next. Interestingly, I got an amazing letter from a parent who's a doctor, and he was Italian, and he wrote to me in the strongest terms. It was one of those letters that you sort of fear getting as a head, and he said, you cannot afford to wait for the Scottish Government to make a decision. You have to shut the school now. And this is what's happening. The reality is this, and if you delay, you're going to put the whole community at risk. Now, fortunately, I got the letter the day before the Scottish Government made the decision to close schools, but he had seen what was ahead, and I think that was a theme which ran through the whole pandemic, was that we have such a high proportion of parents who are doctors, who are medics working, who were key workers. That on the one hand, we had up-to-date direct information, which was golden information to help us in terms of keeping the community safe. And also we had a job to do, because we needed to look after their children while they did the work that they needed to do. And so it's surreal, the thought going back to the day that I recorded a video message on my iPad, never having recorded myself or ever spoken to camera like that. And I had to work it out. And the funny thing is that the staff joked about it afterwards, was I put it on the low coffee table. And so the finished article, even though I did do about 19 or 20 takes, was really my knees were front and centre of the entire piece, and I don't think anyone was listening to what I was actually saying. Anyway, I did have to take my desk chair, put it in the back of the car, and at the end of the day, I basically left the school and the gates were locked behind me. And that was it. So I think we had about 48 hours to prepare for it. And I think, Nathan, what people have asked me about it, it was a baptism of fire. I've heard that so many times. It must have been horrendous. How did you manage and cope? There wasn't there was no rule book. There was nothing. It was entirely instinctive. You had to go on just, what's the right thing to do here for our people, for our human beings in the school, and our pupils, their parents, staff. What's the right way to go? And it comes down to that, back to that piece about and trying to empathise, trying to think, what do we need? Where should the priority be? And it's obvious. The priority is to preserve human life, and how do we do that? And how do we do that in a way which keeps the learning going? And how do we reassure parents that their children are going to be safe and are going to be, the learning and teaching is going to be gone? From a business perspective, it's not an option just to say close down, go home and just do what you can. Actually, this is a service that we provide. And how is that going to be, how are we going to move it online? So when I think back to it, I'm not taking away from the fact that the pandemic was horrific for many people, and we, members of the community lost loved ones, and it was awful. But there were things about the high school that I couldn't have changed in 100 years, which changed virtually overnight. And, initiatives that would have taken me months, if not years, to implement. And one of them was, we had a virtual learning platform, but there was a reluctance about it. And there were many people who just, thought it was, they weren't going to do that. They were going to do real teaching. And however, they had no choice, and everything went online in 48 hours. And we did in-service training online, virtual, 2 days. And that's it, Teams, you get to work out Teams and everything would go online. We delivered the entire curriculum online. And we nuanced it with the second lockdown, but amazing things happened. Teachers didn't wait for permission to, freed from exams. You're going to decide what they get. So we had staff doing all sorts of things, taking their iPads, going down their gardens and doing biology in their garden, or going for a walk and, so virtually you've got the whole class with you. Everyone's going out for a walk and they're around their local school and they're connected by their iPads, or there's a piece of work which you do and then you come back in. It just was so innovative. And when I look back, there's part of me which feels regret that we've not done more to keep that kind of approach to learning going, because everything just, is the need for stability and security and predictability and back onto your comfort zone is so great that, and people talked about it, we just need to go back to normal, back to normal. You can't go back. As a historian even, I know that. There's only forward. But it's this normal. What the heck is that? And this desire for normal, the desire to be normal, to fit in, all of these things which I kind of rail against. And part of me thinks, what should I have done to try and sort of make sure that didn't happen? And I'm probably being too hard on myself, but I think the pandemic then, coupled with the cost of living crisis after that, was just, it's felt to me as if I've never managed to really get back into some kind of planned way forward. And the pressure for, we've had short-term plans and short-term imperatives, and last year we went through a kind of efficiency review, and it was a financial recovery, not because we're in crisis, but because the writing's been on the wall for some time in terms of just everything costs more. So we need to be as efficient as we can while not compromising on quality. And that balance is, it's taken a lot of focus to get us to that place. And so it's strange, but I feel that I'm only now, 4 years on, 4.5 years on almost, really able to put my head up and look forward and think, okay, I need to re-engage with what it was that I wanted to, sort of lead forward before I just had, life came at us. And, alongside that, I know that the pandemic is a key historical event. It will be seen and analysed and gone over, and there's going to be second-year classes in the future being set titles about the pandemic. And, I've been in this job at that time. And so there's a sense of history as well about it. So it's not as if it's all been, kind of a distraction from what I want to do. But I do feel that, I've still got an energy. And talking to you, it's interesting. Talking to you re-engages me with, with what it is, why I'm here, what's the why, the purpose, Why do I do what I want, what I do? And there's a huge opportunity in this role to move things forward, not just for pupils at the school, but my real, desire to find a way to have an impact on improving outcomes more widely. And in Dundee, I've worked in this city, not Dundonian, but I've worked in the city for such a long time, and I believe that there's a real opportunity to do that. I think there's a will. I think there genuinely is a will for the community to work together, and that's the most exciting thing. If I can have some impact on that as head here, that would be what I'd really want to do.
Amazing. It's great how you've gone through something that was very difficult, but there's so many positives in what you're sharing, and you've got such vision and hope for the future with it. So that's tremendous.
I think young people of all ages give me hope. The great thing about being a teacher is that there are no 2 days or 2 lessons the same. People looking for variety. Teaching, working in a school is it. And young people are amazing, and they get bad press. They do, young people of today. And you get old and you think things are going to the dogs, and it's not true. Young people are young people, and they're experimenting. They're trying out new things. They're open to new things. And as you get older, you become less and less open to the new. As a rule, I'm generalising. But I just think that their ideas are amazing. And I think that I always, when I think about it, think we need to do more. More to listen to our young people, more to involve our young people in what we're doing. And, we sometimes miss that key element. Think of our customers as, the parents as customers, which they are technically, but actually our young people are the people who are actually the ones who are consuming what the school is all about, and also enriching it with what they do and what they bring back to the community. So it's not a one-way or even a two-way street. But it's I am hopeful.
And going back to kind of getting the role as the first woman to be rector of the High School of Dundee, and also kind of being here for several years and kind of working with staff and colleagues in that way, and then suddenly getting this promotion, was there any kind of, not so much opposition, but kind of negativity from others or anything like that? Was there any kind of those emotions, and how do you go about dealing with that?
I think it's a really good question. I've always wanted to be liked. I think most people do. But that can be it can be debilitating. Because if you always step through wanting to be liked, one, you'll be disappointed, and two, it's not necessarily going to lead to the best decisions for other people. And I think I've had to really grapple with that. So, I mean, I would like to think, and anyone probably would, coming into the job, I had a real desire to make the school better for the staff. And I believe that actually understanding the staff, having an understanding of the kind of just the context, the journey to that point as a member of staff, as a member of the senior leadership team, understanding the difference in how you're viewed when you move into senior leadership was one of the most important learning experiences, I think. If I just go off on a tangent about that, I remember being appointed as deputy head pastoral, and we had this great sort of, the history, geography department, the economics department were there, and every day we used to meet in the staff room, and the head of geography used to make home baking, and we had such a laugh. Anyway, the day that my appointment was announced, I came over here. I was, I'd been somewhere else in school, and I came into the staff room and everyone stopped talking. And I said, "Oh, were you talking about me?" Joke, laugh. And they didn't say anything. It was just a very awkward silence and people looking at the ground. And it was like a realization that it doesn't matter how much you're part of that group. You're one of the guys. You step into that senior leadership position and it changes. Now, that doesn't mean to say that you're not respected or liked or anything. It's just your management and leadership. Leadership's a softer description of the same thing, but you're in charge. You make decisions, and therefore people view you differently. And over the years, I've sort of counselled staff who, internal appointments particularly, or you think that you're the one who's going to break that mold. You've got great friends on the staff. You're one of the guys. I said, yes, you are, but it won't be any different for you. And it's not. And it's one of the most difficult things that you have to realise, that you move into senior position. People think you're paid a fortune, which you're not. They think that means that effectively, you do everything. That goes with the territory. Whereas even middle leadership positions are not the same. So being a head of department or a principal teacher of pastoral care and support, it's different. But you move into management and the relationship changes. So I had to sort of build that resilience and acceptance that I wasn't always going to be liked. Mm. And it's one of the big challenges, I think, of leadership. But what I also try and remember is what I used to say and think about the senior leadership team when I wasn't in it. And it could be very uncomplimentary, and I believed them to be cut off from the reality of what was actually going on, and just not really aware of the important things. This is a school, and we're teaching pupils, and it's all very well, but they're just doing meetings, and what are they doing? And I've never forgotten it. And so quite often it can be frustrating in a senior role that the staff just seem to be really difficult at times. And I always say, I remember what it was like. And I'm quite sure that that's what the view is of this senior leadership team, no matter how good it is, because there just can't be that understanding of the difference on the role. So I think that's helped. That's helped me because I've been here for so long. I have a kind of connection into not just the individuals, many of whom I've worked with for a lot of that time, but just the kind of, I understand the peculiar dynamic of the school, because of the way it's set up, etc. And I think that helps. I think COVID, the whole thing actually did bring the community together as well. I would say that, so the first test for me really was to lead the school through the pandemic. And that was, what I did was, it wasn't something I kind of remember deciding, but it just seemed to me that I needed to communicate as much as possible. I needed to create as much certainty as I could, even if that was, you're going to hear from the rector once a week or twice a week. You're going to see her in her house, you're going to hear from her, you're going to then be able to read what's going on, so that at each stage, and it was focused on the COVID advice. The COVID, so what's coming from the government, we had an internal deputy head who was our COVID guru, and the deputy rector, junior years, led our care hub. She ran the care hub up at our sports centre and nursery. And then laterally the deputy rector, senior years, ran all the learning and teaching. And it was if you look at it from a sort of project point of view, it's probably how things should always run. But it's good, it's given me food for thought. But so the first test, I think, in terms of, right, well, you have to step up. What you're going to do? No, it's not something that had been planned. It wasn't planned for anyone. So you just need to do it. Just get on and do it.
I like that. Is that how you would describe your leadership style?
Yes, probably. Instinctive. And yeah, the one thing I'm obsessed with, if I think about it, what do I do without being nagged? Which is what I say to the kids when I'm trying to get to a conversation about what ticks your boxes, what floats your boat, what do you do without being nagged to do it? So it's communicate. And I'm probably quite frustrating for the senior team that I'm a bit of a control freak when it comes to messaging. And just my desire to be as open as I can. It kind of freaks some of the other staff out because, we've got to manage the messaging. Yes, we do. But I just believe that as far as possible, you need to share as much as you can and put your hand up when you get it wrong. And I think that would be the philosophy. I want to be as open as I can. I want to understand as much as I can, take account of what's going on for people in their lives, in terms of how we respond as a school and as an employer. And whether or not the staff would think this is interesting, but I do think the staff are the most important group in the school. So rectors tend to be, they think it's the parents or it's the pupils, and the staff are the least important. Is absolutely not what I think. I'm a yellow colour energy. So that's what I bring naturally to every situation. I want to talk it out. I want to be at the forefront of it. I want to find solutions that are people focused. And yeah, I like to work out a way forward through discussion.
What do you do when you come across someone who does not like communication at that same level?
And that happens quite a lot. That's where I've had to learn not to beat myself up about it, because the flip side of it is that, well, what is it? You're not so good with the blue stuff. Where's the strategy and the 4-point plan, and where is the data to support that way forward? I'm about feeling and intuition, and sort of let's all work together. And it's hugely frustrating for the people who just want, Lise, look, hang on, where's the action plan? When is it to be done by? What's the outline? So it's a work in progress, Nathan, is all I would say. I don't think I sometimes will beat myself up about it, and I need to get better. For me, the thing for me to having got through this period of which, particularly last year, a redundancy process which was brutal, brutal for the community, and it's had a seismic impact on the community, and it's made them anxious. And, you know, I think recently, speaking to the staff just about trying to create, you know, we've recalibrated the school financially. We're in a really good position moving forward. Of course, there are challenges ahead. You know, there are, but you know, there's lots of reasons to be positive, and it's not happened. Not one individual person is the reason for that. This is a community that have worked through this together, just like we did in the pandemic, and got us to this situation. And it's that community that's going to move us forward and be successful. But I need to be better at handing certain things over, being clear what the tasks are for success and the criteria for success, and handing those over to people who've got the real skills to do that, so that they're in their comfort zone when they're doing things that I wouldn't be my comfort zone. So effective delegation is still something that I need to work on and get my head round. I feel like I've got an energy and a hunger to do that, and some headspace to do it.
Yeah.
Which I've lacked, I think.
Yeah. Brilliant. And if there was one piece of advice that you could go back and give yourself as a younger girl, or even like advice as well that would be relevant for your students, what do you think would be a good golden nugget to pass on?
I think about this in relation to my own children as well, my two daughters, both of whom came to the school, and one of whom is on the big picture that you took behind me. Or actually, it was probably your wife that took it, I think.
Yeah, I think kind of, yeah.
Which is my why. That's why that picture is there in the middle, because that articulates for me what the school's all about. Family, you know, sort of the journey from 3 to 18, community, learning. It just speaks to me of why it's such an amazing opportunity to do this job. The advice for my children is probably just worry less about what you think people think about you, because they're not thinking about you, they're thinking about themselves. And it's the thing which really holds our young people back. And I think it probably held me back. But I had a very strong role model in my grandmother, who had the view that you should never say what if. You never want to be in a position to say, what if I'd done that? What if I'd given that a go? And regret that you don't. And it doesn't mean you just have to do everything and take risks. That's not what it was. But it's just a philosophy she had that was, don't ever be in a position where you say what if.
That is incredible advice. Very good, very good. And so you're in this role. Where do you go from here?
Well, so it's really interesting because, Nathan, you get to this stage in your career, and every week I'll have, sort of people getting in touch. And I'm not unusual in this. I don't regard myself as unusual in this. You get in touch, we'd like you to consider, there's a headship in New Zealand, there's one in Dubai. What about Kazakhstan? There's a real opportunity to lead an international school in here, there, and everywhere. And they come across your desk or your email, and you do think, I've still got stuff to do here. So there's more I want to do here, and the chance to actually go back. I went back recently to my presentation when I was appointed, and what I did was I projected forward 5 years, talking about, there was almost a bog standard interview question and presentation, the high school in 5 years, what are your aspirations in 5 years' time, which was 2024.
Wow.
So I went back to it, and I on the one hand, I was it was reassuring that all of those things that I wanted and I'd projected forward were still things that I absolutely want to do. And yet, they've not been achieved. So there's still things I want to do here. I believe that there's an opportunity here for us to work, if we were to work together and say, let's just for sake of argument, let's take down all these barriers that exist, whether they're real or imagined or perception. Imagine what we could do if we worked together. If we said, right, our aim together is to improve outcomes for young people in Dundee, to make real learning available to them all. And that real learning is beyond exam results and attainment in that way, but experience, soft skills, emotional intelligence, exposing them to the arts and music and drama and sport and Lego club and Rubik's Cube club and debating or whatever it is, exposing them to that in an organised way and bringing together the huge experience, expertise, resource that exists in the city, and entrepreneurs and business and education. Imagine what we could do if we were joined up. I want to try and have some impact on that moving forward, and because I believe it's beneficial. It'd be beneficial for everyone. Beyond the high school, I never, until the pandemic, I never considered it. I just believed I would work here until, probably I think it's important to have the energy that you need. And I do think that it becomes a time in life where if you can't bring that visceral energy to the job, you need to stop. Because it does require energy. I suppose initially I had thought about, so one of the big important things which has happened to me sort of personally, but also has an impact on me professionally, is my elder daughter's illness. When she struggled with anorexia hugely when she was 14 and a half, 15, fourth year on, and she's much better now, but it's an illness which, is probably never going to entirely leave her. And actually, I wouldn't necessarily want that. But it taught me so much about parenting, and it taught me so much about how to engage with parents. Lots of heads will say, parents are the nightmare. Parents are really what makes this job difficult. I just think as a parent, you're irrational about your own children. You are, I am. And I think it's helped me to really understand that in terms of what the school can do to support parents who are bewildered by what happens to their children. How do you manage what they're exposed to? How can you navigate through that? And I think originally I'd wanted to do something that was charity work in that sphere, potentially with my daughters even. So I'm not planning to move on yet, but yeah, it's exciting. I think you always want to have a sense of, well, what is there beyond what you're doing?
That's good. And finally, what do you want your legacy to be?
That's a horrible question.
Is it?
I think legacy is so difficult because there's something, I feel it's kind of pompous. The idea of a legacy is a pompous. Who am I to have a legacy? But I know that that's the kind of expectation, and it would be a missed opportunity not to have a legacy. And I've done enough coaching and kind of, that kind of work where this is a way of focusing you on what you want to achieve, to be able to say, oh, this is what I did. I want it to be, actually it's back to probably, if it's not too cheesy an answer, I just want to have had an impact on now it's more than one generation of young people, and to have, for them to have had the confidence to be themselves, and to have built that. you know, if that can be the legacy, is a generation or two of young people who are going out and changing the world for the better, that's it for me.
That's an amazing legacy to have.
Sounds quite pompous though, you know, change the world for the better. But that's just to be yourself, you know, to be yourself and to be kind. The kids will be able to tell you that, I think. You know, what's Mrs. Hudson's favourite core value? Kindness. I think it's a superpower.
Yeah.
And I think if you can be kind, you are therefore, by definition, thinking of somebody else. You have to think of somebody else's perspective. And that changes the world. If that was the way we dealt with everything, things would be a heck of a lot better than sometimes they are.
Yeah. Wow. Lise, thank you so much for your time today.
Oh, that's
absolutely
okay.
Amazing speaking with you. So many amazing stories and learns and just things that you've been through. So thank you for sharing that. I know that will be very beneficial for lots of people to hear. So yeah, thank you.
It's an amazing opportunity, Nathan, because you don't often get the chance to sit down and sort of be asked to think about these things. So there's lots of stuff. I hope it, you know, it sort of comes across as this stream of consciousness. And it's quite a long time you've asked me to reflect over.
Yeah.
But it's just, I mean, a privilege to sort of speak to you and to think about it and have the space to reflect on it. Really invigorating to get the chance to do it.
Good. Brilliant.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on Legacy Conversations. I hope you've enjoyed it and found it beneficial. I'm looking forward to the next one.